Yeah, Alimadad, everybody. My name is Shaheen. I am the Social Welfare Board member responsible for inclusion in the Parent Support Group. So welcome to our session this evening entitled Managing Behaviour with Positive Language. This is the second in our series, and once again we are joined by Shalina Mitter, who is an experienced speech and language therapist, currently working in a special needs college, and she's got a range of experience from very young children to older ones, so we're very lucky to have her here. For the first part of the session, I'll just now hand over to Shalina.
Yalimadad, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be with you again, and thank you for having me a second time. Last time we discussed that there were lots of questions about how to create a positive environment for communication at home and managing our children's behavioral challenging behavior sometimes. So I've geared this presentation for that purpose, but also, as Shaheen said, it's about sharing. So I'm going to just share a few things, and at the end, what we're hoping is that parents in the group will share what's worked for them, and that becomes much more meaningful rather than a person like me just saying what works. I think it's about everybody contributing. So to begin, I want to put the question out in your minds as to thinking about what causes a behavior problem. Thinking about when your child is not behaving in the expected manner, what is it that triggered it? Can you find a pattern sometimes? Can you think about what was going on just before that behavior happened? And can you also think about describing that behavior? What exactly did that behavior look like? And what was it about the behavior that was unexpected for you? And then thinking about what happened as a result. So we call these the ABC of behavior. The A is the antecedent, the B is the behavior, and the C is the consequence. And when you become very, very descriptive and observant about the behavior, you can identify patterns sometimes. So what the triggers are and what the nature of the behavioral difficulty is, and then the consequence of that. So once you get a handle on that, you feel like you have a little bit more control over what to do about it. So there is a lot of research out there that shows that challenging behavior is usually due to an unmet need. I was saying that you have to think about the patterns that you're observing in terms of antecedents, behaviors, and consequences. There is a lot of studies out there that shows that any challenging behavior is due to an underlying need that hasn't been met. It could be a very simple underlying need that hasn't been met. Maybe the child's hungry, maybe the child's tired, maybe the child's just a bit bored and wanting to do something a little bit more interesting. So that there are very, very different underlying needs that haven't been met. So the first step is for us as parents to observe what the antecedents are and then look at the type of behavior problem and try and think about what's the underlying need that hasn't been met. So when you're doing that, when you observe your child doing something, it's first of all very important that you comment on what you see, because just describing the behavior out loud will help the child to see that you are attending. Sometimes children play up because they want the attention, they want a reaction. And I know this sounds strange, but some studies have shown that children would rather have negative attention than no attention at all. So being ignored is worse than being told off for some children, which to me was quite interesting. So if you can give attention to your child about that behavior and show that you're being attentive and observe it and then comment on it in a very, very precise way, the child gets the sense that actually you are with them and you are giving them attention. But what you're not doing is labeling that attention or or making value judgments on that behavior. All you're doing is describing the behavior. And the other thing you're not doing is asking lots and lots of questions like, why are you doing that? Who told you to do that? When did you decide to do this? You know, all these questions that are bombarding a child when they are in the throe of a meltdown or a tantrum, it's just going to increase pressure on them. Because when you're in that state of emotional dysregulation, you have less thinking capacity, and the frontal lobe cannot think. It's the limbic system that's taken over, and the frontal lobe has less capacity for answering questions. So actually putting another question on top of all that emotional flooding will only exacerbate the problem. So that's the first step. The second step is when you describe the behavior, be careful that you are avoiding labeling. So you could say, in linking these 2 points together, you could say something like, so you're kicking the ball in the house, or something like that. So you're observing, and you could say something like, balls are for the outdoors, not for the indoors. Kicking balls is for outdoor play, or something like that, giving them information rather than saying something like, that's really naughty, you're being really naughty, you're being very aggressive, you're being very moody, you're being very blah, blah, blah. And, you know, we often use words like that with children, and we label them inadvertently. You're lazy, you're naughty, you're bad, you're whatever we say. But actually, the labels then affect the child. And there's studies to show that labels become a self-fulfilling prophecy. What I mean by that is that the more you hear that word put on you, the more likely you are to play into that word and play into that role. So if someone always calls you naughty as a child, you take that self-image as being naughty, and you'll carry on being naughty because that's what you're comfortable as. That's what people know you as, and that's the image you have of yourself. We can also work with positive labels. If somebody always says, oh, she's very good, she's very kind, she's very helpful, that similarly creates that type of label on you that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And though that can be good, it can also have some repercussions when actually you can't always do those things. Sometimes it's okay if you can't do those things. So being very careful about the labels we throw on our children. We talked last time about communication, and I brought it in just as a link for this, because if a child is bombarded with too much language and complex language when they are unable to process in that emotional state, the chances of them listening to you are going to be very slim. But if you reduce and simplify and modify what you want to say and limit the number of words, you're more likely to allow the child to just calm down first. So it's really important to avoid very lengthy discussion with them when they're in that state. And I think last time I did mention a lady called Temple Grandin, who has autism, and she is a professor, and she now talks about her autism as a child, and that when she was having a meltdown, the best thing her mum did was to say, okay, let's go to your room, you're having a bad time, let's go to your room, and when you're ready, when you've calmed down, and when you think you can join us, then come down. So it was about just letting her come out with all her stress that she had, and just giving her a chance without too much language, without too much, no questions, no labels, none of that, just letting her calm down before any discussion can happen. So remember, no processing of language will happen in that state. One of the important things that we can do for our children is framing things in the positive rather than using the word don't. So for example, if I ask you to, if I say, don't think of a pink elephant, what do you immediately do? I bet you've all got images of pink elephants in your head. So when we say don't do something, the child has already got set to do what we've told them not to do, because that's what they visualize. And when they visualize that, that's what they're programmed to go and do. So if you say, don't drop the glass, they already visualize dropping that glass. But if you say to them, hold the glass with 2 hands, now you're giving them some help. You're giving them some strategies, and you're giving them an image of what they can be doing. And then they follow that image. And I recall my own little boy doing this when I learned this, and he was a toddler, and I had a flood in my kitchen. And I said, I almost said, don't step in that water. And I remembered this, and I said, find the dry bits. And he was literally a toddler, and he was looking for the dry bits on the floor to stand on. So if you can practice changing don't do something into what you want them to do, and practice that, it doesn't come naturally, because we're so programmed to say don't do this and don't do that, but tell them what you want them to do, and somehow it works, and it really did work. So when you praise little glimpses of positive behavior, even if they're not behaving exactly how you want, but you can see little glimpses of the positive behavior in between, that's the time to catch it. Catch it when you see small glimpses, and reward it straight away, because if you reward it then, that behavior will get repeated and it will appear more often. So for example, if a child finds it really hard to stay sitting down at the table, and they just keep jumping around, and it's really hard for you to keep getting them back on the table, what you could do is, when they do sit for a little while, you can say, I love the way you sat at the table for so long today. That made me so happy. And then you give them a reward. And I used to use rewards with my children, and we use them a lot at work as well. You could have anything that's a reward, but I would say think carefully about the reward that you decide to give them. Praise is lovely, because praise doesn't require them getting expectations of something. But if you choose a really expensive reward each time, then what will happen is the day they don't get that expensive reward, they're going to have another meltdown. So you don't want them to get dependent on material rewards so much, and also avoiding sweets, of course, because you don't want to reward with sweets. That's a terrible reward. But what you can do is maybe something like a stamps on a wall, or stickers, nice smelly stickers, or just a high five every time they get something done really well, a nice hug. Whatever they like. And then after they've got an X number of stars or stickers or whatever, then they can have another treat, a proper, big treat, a bigger treat, maybe a treat of getting their favorite DVD or something like that. So there are ways of praising and rewarding that avoid you getting into deeper trouble with their expectations of the reward as well. The minute that you recognize their positive behavior, you'll see a change in them, because they will understand what it is that you are expecting of them, because you've been specific in observing it and rewarding it. So then they understand, because they're children, they don't understand really what the expected behaviors are until you shape it. So you've got to be very observant, pick it up, and be clear about it to them so they can understand what it is. One very important strategy about managing behavior is how to acknowledge the child's feelings. When the child is in a throe of a meltdown, you can identify the feeling and say, I can see you're feeling very angry right now. And even if you just keep repeating that, you're very angry, you're really cross, you're really annoyed, and keep rephrasing it and just keep saying it, I guarantee that the child will start to get calmer, because you're giving them that attention, and they'll recognize that you are interested in how they feel. Okay, so immediately acknowledging feelings helps to calm children down. And sometimes what you have to do is be very, very good with your vocabulary for feelings. You know, try and find the right feeling word. If you get the feeling word wrong, they won't be impressed with you, because they might be feeling frightened and you're saying they're feeling tired, and they'll get even more right there. She's not tuned into me. So what you have to do is really get into the under their skin and think about what they're feeling inside and get that feeling word right. Okay, so think about, are they tired, are they hungry, are they frightened of something? And the only way you'll know, again, is to follow that antecedent behavior consequence, to think, what was the trigger that caused this? And then you can link it and say, oh, I think you're feeling frightened of what happened there. I'm just using the math and science because I always do. And, you know, that will make them realize that you are there for them. And the minute that they recognize you're there for them, that need for that yell for help, which is what a behavior problem is, metaphorically, it will calm down. Another good thing is to be expressive about your own feelings and preferences of what you want them to do. And there's a 4-part rule that you might want to write down, because you can use this for children, adults, teams, even in the highest levels of negotiations. They use this formula, which is like this. When you da 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 da, I feel da 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 da, because da, 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 I would prefer it if you da, 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 da. Okay, now I'll explain each bit. So the first bit, when you, so it could be that they are kicking the ball in the house. Okay, when you kick your football around all day in the house, I feel scared and worried, because if the ball hurts you or me, or breaks the window, or your brother or sister, they might have to go to hospital. I would really prefer it if you played your football outside in the garden, because playing with balls is for outdoors. Okay, so what you haven't done is say something like, you always kick that football in the house, and I always tell you not to, and you still always do it. And that's really naughty of you. Can you hear the difference? Because what you haven't done is say the child is always doing this and giving them a label that makes them carry on perpetuating that. But the minute you say you always do this, or you never listen to me, those are absolute terms. And when you use absolute terms, there's no room for change. But when you use relative terms, like being specific about the behavior that you're not happy seeing, and said that you're not happy about that behavior, then they know what your alternative is, they get clearer. And then you might want to even add another level, which is, so when you've said, I'd prefer you to kick the football outside in the garden, you could leave it with another choice at the end and say, you decide, would you like to play tomorrow or the day after in the garden, or something? Give them a forced alternative, which doesn't allow for the choice of playing indoors. Okay? So another strategy, which I think we discussed last time, was using social stories. And you may have heard of this or you may not, but they're sentences that you put together to show a child what is expected. So we're talking about expected behaviors, and we call them unexpected behaviors, because when you say shouting is not good, it confuses a child because people do shout in some places. They shout in the playground, they shout at a football match, you know. There are times when people shout and it's okay, it's an expected behavior. But there are times when shouting is not expected. So that's when you have to write something like a social story and help children to understand what behavior is expected in what situation, how it makes people feel, and your preferred behaviors. It's linked to the previous strategy I gave you about the 4-part rule. So social stories are very effective for getting a long-term change because they're written and recorded, so they're not just verbal, and those children can read them regularly with you, and that regular rehearsed reading of that social story helps them to embed that behavior, because it's a bit like neurolinguistic programming. You control the behavior through the language, and the more your language influences your behavior, the more you're likely to have a long-term change in your behavior. The next point is about giving choices within a framework to promote control, but have your own boundaries. So say you've got a child who just will not eat their dinner, okay, they're refusing to eat and you're really worried. So what you could say to them is something like, okay, let's see, what would you like to have for dinner today? Would you like your carrots or your broccoli? And you know they're not going to eat vegetables generally, but if you give them a choice, they've made the choice, they're more likely to have it. I've probably picked a very ambitious one there because I think that's a really tough one. But say if it's something, you know, you could say, shall we have chicken for dinner? Shall we have chicken nuggets for dinner? Or shall we have meatballs for dinner? And then they can choose. And if they've chosen it, they're more likely to commit to eating it. Okay, so involve them in making the choices, but give the choices within your boundaries so that they still comply with your expectations. Because otherwise what happens is if you just say to them, you choose, what do you want to eat today? You've lost control again, because they might say, well, I want to eat McDonald's every day. Okay, and then you're in trouble. But if you just give them the choice of what is available and what's in your control, and then you use that 4-part strategy again, that works much better. I'm not saying it works every time, by the way, but these are all strategies that do help. The other thing is, I think this one as well, we mentioned last time, but it's very effective in managing behavior. When you prepare a child for what's happening and what will be happening, they get a sense of anticipation and they can prepare for that. We talked last time about transition from one activity to another activity is a huge source of behavior problems for many children with special needs, because when they're doing something they really like it, the minute you stop it, they're going to scream, I don't want to stop this. But what you can do is say at the start, we're going to do this first, then this, then this, and you can even have a timer, and you can turn the timer over and say, okay, when this finishes, that's going to finish, and we'll do the next thing. So you have a now and a next, and then you have the symbol for what's going on now, what will be going on next, the timer, and when it's finished, you can just say, that's finished, well done, there's the next one now. And it will really reduce the tantrums, because they were already anticipating it and they were prepared for it. And it didn't come as a shock or a surprise, and they were not panicked by the change. You will find that they will also direct you once they've got their schedule. If you forget something, which happens sometimes, you know, when I'm working with parents or carers, they've got their schedule up, but they've got the schedule wrong. So they jumped, they missed one thing out, and the child would take them and say, we didn't do that one. And you'll find that the child will be self-directive, and that will bring out cooperation from them with you, because they'll cooperate with the timetable because they signed up with you on the timetable. They committed to it with you. They agreed it with you. So the minute that they've got that timetable, it gives them order and regulation, and they are going to follow that pattern. So you will be the one directed by them. And that's a really good stage when you see that. If you're using AAC, we talked about AAC last time, which is using augmentative methods to help speech, whether it's an object of reference, a visual timetable, signs, communication aids, etc. That will help to give them a comprehension of what's going on, as well as a memory of what you said, because short-term auditory memory is very fragile. It just breaks down, and particularly for children with communication problems. But for all of us, the auditory sense is very transient, whereas the visual and the kinesthetic sense are much more concrete. So, you know, you can remember things better if they've got a visual medium to it. So when you're giving instructions, always support these with something visual or tactile, whether it's a photo, an object, a symbol, a sign. So that way you'll get more cooperation. And the last point I want to make is that pupils or children who will have a better understanding and sense of routine, and they will be calmer and less frustrated and easier to manage if you follow all of those strategies. But I have to say, these are a few, and I'm not saying or claiming that they will give you 100%, you know, wonderful, pristine behavior every time. They work, they do work, and you just have to be consistent and keep applying these. And they may take a little while to work, or they may take a bit longer to work. As long as you're consistent and you have that belief that they can work and that your child can move to a place, and you've seen very clearly the behavior of when they are working in a way you want them to work, or talking or communicating the way you want, that's a glimpse of the positive behavior that you want to reward and reinforce. Reinforce it straight away, and that way hopefully you'll see the progress more quickly.
Thank you very much, Shalina, for sharing all those strategies with us. I think every one of us will have picked up something that we will be reminded of, that we know that we can use, and just really good reminders for each one of us. So thank you. Thank you, parents, for attending today's webinar, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event.